In these uncertain economic times, you've got to do whatever you can to save money. One of our biggest expenses can be our cars, especially when unexpected repair bills hit. Not anymore. If you own a vehicle with less than 130,000 miles, is less than 12 years old, has a warranty about to expire, or even no warranty at all, you could stop paying for car repairs. Roadside assistance, towing, and rental coverage are all included. Don't wait for the next repair. Make one free call right now to see if you qualify. If your vehicle is less than 12 years old, has less than 130,000 miles, even if it's out of warranty, paying for car repairs can become a thing of the past. Call us right now and get your car protected before your next repair bill hits. Get protection and no more repair bills. Call 800-696-1030. Again, 800-696-1030. That's 800-696-1030. 800-696-1030.
Joe had huge problems with the IRS.
I knew it was coming. I hadn't filed taxes since 1990.
All the IRS letters coming in added up to a nightmare.
To get up to like $68,000, my heart started beating fast. It's like, there's no way, man. I mean, I ain't going to be able to do this.
Then they stopped his paycheck.
So that's when I started making phone calls and found U.S. Tax Shield.
U.S. Tax Shield went to work immediately.
They just took the bull by the horns. What blew my mind is he called the IRS right then and there.
So why is U.S. Tax Shield A+ rated with the Better Business Bureau? Joe knows.
They saved me a ridiculous amount of money.
If you owe more than $10,000 to the IRS or state, choose the company Joe chose, U.S. Tax Shield.
It was the best decision I made. U.S. Tax Shield is the way to go. Life is good. Thank you, Lord.
Call 800-471-3287.
U.S. Tax Shield. Boo-rah. Yes.
800-471-3287. 800-471-3287.
The Internet will never be the same. You're listening to K98Talk.com.
Wow! Good God, y'all. What is it good for? Absolutely. Now get set again.
Say what you need to say. 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 Say what you need to say.
Here's Graceland with Jennifer Meadows.
Well, the Republican establishment thinks the unthinkable, that Donald Trump could actually win the nomination. And Ed Rollins, who served as campaign director for Ronald Reagan's 1984 re-election campaign, and Steve Schmidt, who managed John McCain's 2008 presidential campaign, agree that Trump is now a serious player. Even Chris Wallace said on Fox News Sunday, he says, I know all of us dismissed Trump early on, all of the so-called experts. The summer fling, a momentary amusement. But Wallace, who interviewed Trump late last week and aired portions of the interview on his show Sunday, said he finds himself feeling differently now. He said, as I watched the interview and I heard what he had to say, I'm beginning to believe he could be elected president of the United States, he said. But you're listening to Graceland on WNJC 1360 AM. I am Jennifer Meadows, along with co-host and journalist Kevin Fobbs. And our guest on the program is Major General Paul Vallely to discuss the Syrian refugee crisis. And he'll be on with us in just a moment. And media personality Charles Albert Johnson III will join us at the bottom of the hour. But Kevin, I don't know, President Trump, I mean, what do you think? Is it possible that we could actually be looking at Trump as president of the United States?
I think we're sort of headed in that direction. The person that I really watched besides Ed Rollins in terms of that kind of determination was actually Chris Wallace, because Chris Wallace has been sort of like hesitant to even declare that he was a bona fide anything, let alone a candidate. And when I saw that interview and I sort of looked at the questions that he asked and his reaction to the answers, and also looking at the polls themselves, this guy has actually maintained, in some cases has actually grown in the lead in terms of reaching across not just party lines, but reaching across certain kinds of income lines and
racial lines.
Racial lines, yeah, exactly. So this guy may be able to at least take it to the first several battleground states in terms of the primaries. I think the real question for him being serious actually will come on Super Tuesday in March. I think that really will dictate, I believe, what will happen to his potential candidacy.
Yep, and I think, too, when you start looking at who would he pick for a VP, that's a very interesting question, too.
I already got the answer, Kasich.
Oh, you think it's going to be Kasich?
I really do, because now look at this, Jennifer. He has not attacked. He's attacked pretty much everybody. He's been like an open season attacker on every person that's been an opponent, with the exception of Kasich. And you look at how Kasich has dealt with this too. Everybody needs, Democrats, Republicans need Ohio, and Kasich will not make it to the big party, so to speak. But I think that he will actually be the person on several people's minds in terms of, if it's not Trump, I don't know if Carson will make it, even though he's number 2. But I'm just saying that I think Kasich has a lock on the VP slot.
That's interesting. That's not a person I would have picked. And I thought it was definitely going to be a Cruz Trump type. But, the two of them just this past week or two have started attacking each other. So I don't know. The love is gone, I guess, between Cruz and Trump, maybe. But I don't know. But we'll revisit that, I guess, after the first of the year. But it is
Mark my words.
Okay, now I'm going to remember that because you said Kasich. So very interesting. That's the one guy I probably would not have picked. So very, very cool. But I believe Major General Paul Vallely is with us. And General, thank you for joining us on the program.
Well, thank you, Jennifer, for the kind invitation.
We are certainly glad to have you with us. Well, Major General Paul Vallely is our guest, who is a U.S. Army retired. General Vallely retired in 1991 as Commanding General of the U.S. Army Pacific in Honolulu, Hawaii. He served in a number of overseas theaters to include Europe and the Pacific Rim countries, and served 2 combat tours in Vietnam. The general is a military analyst for Fox News and also co-author of the book titled The End Game, Winning the War on Terror. And like I said, General, appreciate you joining us this evening.
Okay, happy to be with you, and I guess this is our first time, so we'll have an interesting interview, hopefully.
Certainly. And today we are talking about the Syrian refugees, and I believe you were just in Europe to meet with Russian officials about the refugee crisis. So tell us about how this refugee crisis began, first of all, and then, and my B part to that question is, what was the purpose of your trip to Europe? Because I think a lot of people have lost sight. We've been dealing with this situation now for a couple of years in Syria.
Well, great question. Yes, I just spent 12 days over in Europe, in Vienna, Austria, and in Paris, France. And I represent Stand Up America. I'm the chairman of Stand Up America, which is a non-government organization. And, of course, your listeners can go on our website and see the report that I provided upon my return. That's at standupamericaus.org. But I was invited over to meet with senior Syrian officials who had left the Assad government, as well as European leaders. And so while we were in Vienna, I was able to visit with about 20 senior people there and discuss the refugee crisis and our 6-point plan that I've outlined and presented over there. But I was able to go to the Bahnhof there, the Vienna railroad station, and see the transit, some 400 or 500 refugees getting off the train from Hungary, as they had transited up from Syria to Greece to Macedonia through Serbia on up into Hungary, and of course Hungary basically has shut their borders other than the trains that are coming in carrying these refugees. But here's what is interesting. What they do, they have money to buy the train tickets. Now, once they buy those tickets and transit through the open borders of Europe, then they declare refugee status, and the countries by a treaty are required to keep them and treat them as refugees. So they've got themselves into a real bind over there by having that particular treaty exist. But for the most part, 7 out of 10 were young males, 20 to 30s. There were families. There were children. They were very well dressed, very well healthy. But we saw some pictures today, what's going on in Serbia and some of the other areas. So it's a mishmash over there. It's a real problem. We then went to Paris, where we had a conference call, and then a conference with some senior French officials and some more, I would say, senior Syrians who have taken up residence, for example, in France. And then I met with Putin's senior ambassador for Syria and the Middle East, Ambassador Bogdanovich. And that was very interesting. We were able to outline our plan to them on how to solve this situation. By the way, Stand Up America, we're the only ones have come out with a written 6-point plan how to solve this. No other country has, not even the United States State Department.
Good grief! Yeah, well, and I certainly want to get into that a little bit later, but I'm going to toss it to Kevin. I believe he's got a question for you as well, General.
General, I'm concerned, I guess, and without knowing what the 6-point plan in detail is, I guess we have heard this whole idea that if we create this no-fly zone, that would be an answer to this issue, and that we've heard that if Russia could only sit down and deal with ISIS and not just try to deal with those moderate Syrians who are actually have been supported by the United States, that is an answer. And then without going into the 8-point plan, do you feel that a no-fly zone is actually a practical solution, or are we past that?
Oh, we're well beyond that at this point in time. Putin and the Russians are controlling the chessboard. They control the ports. They control basically what Assad is doing now in his government in western Syria. They're hitting civilians and children, families, and they're hitting very little of what we call the ISIS targets. They're primarily hitting the Free Syrian Army, which are the true freedom fighters over there, who, when I was in Syria 2.5 years ago, told the U.S. government, you've got to support the Free Syrian Army. These are true freedom fighters, and they're not just military people. These are ministers, lawyers, doctors who defected from the Assad government and made up the Free Syrian Army, and nobody would help them. Now we're sending some arms in, and so when you talk about the moderate Syrian, that doesn't mean much. What it really is the Free Syrian Army who we need to be supporting, just like we should be supporting the Kurds more. Those are our boots on the ground. But certainly a ceasefire by the Russians, and of course now they're aided by Cubans who have come in, as well as a Chinese aircraft carrier came off the shores there of Syria. Then you've got Hezbollah, and then you've got Iran supporting Assad. But I told the Russian ambassador, nothing is going to happen until Assad is replaced. There must be a new interim government put in. That is the first thing. Then they must stop, and you can call it a no-fly zone, but they've got to stop targeting the Free Syrian Army and the innocent civilians over there. Now, once they secure the western part of Syria, now they can start bringing back the refugees. Now, the refugees do not want to stay in Europe. They want to go back to their cities and towns for the most part. But you do have a percentage of the refugees who are ISIS, and they want to get up there and extend in the cell development throughout Europe. But the refugee problem has been going on for a long time now. And the Turks and the Lebanese have been taken in, I should say, the majority of the refugees. And many of them now are coming out of these Turkish camps and are finding their way to Europe with their final destination primarily being Germany.
Well, then I guess what happens then in terms of the United States, or even for Britain or some of the other Western countries, in terms of being able to determine who is actually ISIS or ISIL and who are actually legitimate refugees?
Well, that's one of the big challenges. They're not vetting the people as they're coming across. They're getting off the trains. I saw them. They'll go to a community center and they'll get baths. They'll be fed. Some of them have papers. Some of them don't. But it's just like many of the refugees coming into this country. They're not being vetted at all. And that's a big problem. Because if you don't vet them out and document them, how are you ever going to try to police your country up and separate out the bad guys from the good guys?
And for the United States, you have the president who says we're going to take in 10,000 and or up to perhaps 100,000. The question, I guess, for us here in America, isn't that dangerous if the vetting process actually takes about a year, if he wants to escalate that process so that it begins sort of immediately?
No, that's a myth. The vetting can be done immediately as soon as they sit them down, and they can vet them out pretty quickly. That can be done right away with a number of people through the centers that they're passing through. So you can start vetting immediately. That's a matter of profiling them, who they are, where they came from, do they have papers, don't they have papers, are they women, are they children? So Europe has done a terrible job in vetting a lot of these, even from Morocco up into Holland, up into Sweden, and, of course, into France. So Europe has been very, very lax, and now they're paying the price for it.
Well, and it's very interesting because I hadn't even considered this concept, that the refugees want to go back to Syria, which makes sense, actually, General.
For sure.
But, of course you want to go back to your homeland. But, Europe, Africa, and even we're getting some of these Syrians now are immigrating into the United States. So they're scattering to pretty much all places all around the world. And with that, General, we do need to go to break, but we are talking to Major General Paul Vallely. He's discussing the Syrian refugee crisis. This is Philadelphia's 1360 AM. More on this story coming up next.
Hi, this is Ronnie Wood of the Stones for Rad. You know it's okay to rock and roll and party, because I do it all the time. Just let someone else do the driving. That's what I do. Remember, rock lives, and you should too. Please don't drink and drive.
A public service message brought to you by the U.S. Department of Transportation, RAD, the National Association of Broadcasters, and the Ad Council.
So, I'm a dog, and I just got adopted by this new human guy, and I'm starting to wonder how he got along without me. I mean, okay, something as simple as walking around the block. He's got this leash thing, and he puts me on one end and him on the other, and I'm just taking him around. I think he's afraid of getting lost. Without that leash and me guiding him along, I don't think he'd find his way back home. But it's kind of cute.
A person is the best thing to happen to a shelter pet. Be that person. Adopt. Brought to you by the Ad Council and the ShelterPetProject.org.
Hey, Billy.
Yeah?
Do you want to go to the state fair?
Yeah.
Do you want to ride the roller coaster?
Yeah.
The big one?
Yeah.
The one with the reverse flip?
Yeah!
Well, you can't.
Huh?
You see, Billy, when you throw away money on wasted electricity, you throw away everything you could have done with it, including going to the state fair.
Oh, man.
Cheer up. This year, your parents will make it right. They're going to visit EnergySavers.gov, where they'll get tips on how to save energy and money. Then they'll add extra insulation and get a few of those Energy Star appliances. They could save hundreds of dollars a year. And you know what, Billy?
What?
They'll take you to the state fair next year.
But I want to go this year.
I know you do, Billy. I know you do. Saving energy saves you money. Learn more at EnergySavers.gov. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Energy and the Ad Council.
So take these words and sing out loud.
Here's Graceland with Jennifer Meadows.
Well, thank you for listening to the program. This is Graceland with Jennifer Meadows, and I am here with author and journalist Kevin Fobbs, and we are talking to Major General Paul Vallely about the Syrian refugee crisis. And General, I know you mentioned before we went to break about a 6-point plan. And I know you mentioned it in an article that you placed on your website about an 8-point solution to this refugee crisis. So it doesn't matter which one, but what I was going to try to get you to do is give us basically an overview of what those points were, or the highlights of what those points were, General.
Sure, Jennifer, I'd be happy to. And Kevin, basically, it's outlining a plan that, if executed, it will solve the refugee problem. It will unite Syria and provide for a future for what I call the new Syria. But first of all, the first point is Assad and his senior people must be removed from office. Only Putin can make that happen right now. Only Putin can control that chessboard. Now, once that's done, then an agreed-upon new interim government has to be put in that will be accepted by the majority of the Syrian people, including the Free Syrian Army and the people in government now. And that government then has to be formed to unite Syria. And at the same time, simultaneously, you must secure western Syria that's under Assad right now, and what we call the Alawites, and the port cities of Tartus and Latakia. Now, once that's done, then the Syrians can be taken by train and by boat and returned back to Syria. And at the same time, they've got to seriously, with the Russians and whatever forces, Turkey would be one, they've got to do everything they can to destroy completely the ISIS areas in eastern Syria. And then, of course, Iraq's a whole different story next door with ISIS. Now, once that's done, then they can start to redevelop, restore Syria, and they can return to their cities in eastern and western Syria, northern and southern. Manufacturing can be put in, the rebuilding of all the structures that have been bombed by Assad and by the Russians and others. So it's a whole future new Syria, and that's what I told the Russians. Putin can be a real hero here, and he can be a real hero by making it sure if they want to take Assad and move him to a Dachau outside of Moscow, that's fine, but he's got to be removed. And the Russians, they never spill exactly what they're going to do, but they shook their heads, and they're considering the plan that I presented. So we'll see what happens.
Well, and that leads into my next question of what is the likelihood, because, like you said, Russia is controlling everything over there. No longer is the United States the big player over there in that region. Russia is kind of taking... We're
not even at the poker table.
Well, and it's sad because of the, our foreign policy, if you want to call it. What foreign policy? What foreign policy does the United States have at this point? But, and so that leads into my question of what is the likelihood that Assad would be removed in the near future since Russia's controlling things over there?
It's up to Russia. And if you, the old TV program, Let's Make a Deal, it's like Trump says. These guys, you can deal with them, but you got to outline something that's going to be to their advantage. And a new Syria could be advantageous for the new pipeline going across Syria into the Mediterranean, the development of resources there. Russia can play an important part with France, Great Britain, some of the other Middle East countries, Turkey, United States can be a player. So, if you lay it out there and make a deal, that's what has to be done. And like I told the Russian ambassador, Assad's been there over 20 years as a dictator and a tyrant. It's time for him to move on. You've got to face reality now. So we'll see what happens. It's in their ball court, really.
General,
yes,
I guess my question I have has to do with the United Nations. And since they've given sort of a pass to Iran, Iran is sort of a puppet state or not actually Syria as a puppet state of Iran, I believe that Iran would probably have something to say about any kind of plan that would be implemented in Syria. And then, of course, the question would be the incentive that Russia would have to want to get rid of Assad when, if I control the person that I know as opposed to the person that I don't know, I want the person that I know. And I think that as long as Assad's in, he can control pretty much any part of Syria that he wants. I'm talking about Putin.
No, Assad controls only a third of the country right now. That's why the Russians are in there trying to give him more control back again. Assad's he's done. He's finished. And I think when the Russians realize that and the Iranians realize it as well, they can move on. But certainly, it's as I said, it's in the Russians' hands right now. And Turkey's not been a good player over there. They've got to stand up and do more. The other Arab countries have to. King Abdullah's done a great job in Jordan. You never know what Saudi Arabia is going to do.
Right.
Joel al-Sisi, who I met with last year, he's got his hands full in Egypt. But they see the United States over there as a country that has no credibility or respect. Our government doesn't. They see Obama as the weakest leader that America probably ever has had. And they're going to take advantage of it. But it takes somebody to go over there and talk to them. And here I am. I'm 75 years old, and I go over and present the only deal from a U.S. non-government organization. So anyhow, that's the situation. And what I tell everybody, America has got to start making decisions not through a political prism, but through a reality prism. We've got to start putting our nation first and quit making decisions based on politics.
Well, General, and speaking of not making decisions on politics, do you think that it would be more prudent for Putin, in this case, to wait until 2017, until there's a new president, to even if he were going to consider the plan that you put out there on the table, for him to take a look at it and consider it seriously, to wait till he has another president who could actually sit at that table in terms of being able to work out a deal, instead of like right now, because we know, I believe right now that this president was not going to do anything, and the or the Western countries are probably not going to do anything yet in Syria. So is that a valid approach for Putin to just wait?
The Russians don't think like that.
They don't?
See, there again, we're thinking in a political mode in elections. They don't think like that.
Okay.
They, like they did in the Ukraine, and like they're doing in Syria now, Putin and his planners have a strategy, and they're working that strategy. Mm-hmm. And they do what is in the best interest of them, of bringing back and reforming the Russian Federation. And that is their plan, and they're working that. So they could care less about our elections over here, as most people around the world don't care about. We're the only ones that care that much about our politics. They're looking at how to make a living and how to continue to prosper. And, of course, the Russians... Yeah, go ahead, Jennifer. Sorry.
Well, and I was going to say it is interesting because what you were saying about seeing everything through a political prism, that is exactly the way our foreign policy and everything seems to happen in the United States at this point, left and right, instead of dealing, like you said, with reality of the situation. And so, I would love to see America, and it is interesting as we come into this next election here in the United States, we're seeing even the people here in America are sick and tired of politics, of the left and right paradigm that keeps going on here. And that's, you're either on the left-hand side of the fence, and instead, let's look at the facts. Let's make decisions based upon, what is best for America, what's best for, in this case, Syria. But that's not what happens. It's always about what's best for the Democratic Party, what's best for the left, what's best for Republicans. That's how we see things.
Jennifer, you're right on target there. And I would say that if you look at the Americans Project, which I wrote a paper on several years ago, it focuses on that exact issue. Be Americans before you're Democrats and Republicans. And now the new article I'll be writing will be about the political prism versus the reality prism. But we have to do that. Kevin and Jennifer, I think you know. I mean, our government is totally broken at the top. The legislative branch can't get anything done. The executive branch, same way. Our judicial system is a mess. And, you know, that's why Trump and Carson and Carly Fiorino, the non-politicians, are so popular right now.
Right. And one last question before we close.
Sure.
What kind of timeline, General, would you give your plan in terms of being able to be implemented? And how should we in America be able to support your plan?
Well, I think join Stand Up America, go to our website, be a part. We've been around since 2006. We're also the ones that co-founded the Benghazi Citizens Commission. I'm a co-founder of that. We also have the Legacy National Security Group, which advises presidential candidates. That's made up of the top retired military minds and CIA and former government officials. And that's all on our website. But join us, help us out. And you, by the way, Kevin and Jerry, you can use anything off my website you'd like. You can republish it, do anything you'd like to get the word out.
Certainly. We appreciate it.
Excellent. And again, want to thank you, General, for being on the show. And also, can you tell our listeners how they can best find you and reach you?
On the StandUpAmericaUS.org, StandUpAmericaUS.org website. And they can access me through there, and then they can access me through chairman at StandUpAmericaUS.org.
Fantastic. And do you have Twitter as well?
Yeah, I do, but I don't use the social websites for what I do.
Okay, great. Again, want to thank you so much.
No, we have them on there. My staff does, but I don't use them.
Okay.
Gotcha. Well, General, we appreciate so very much you coming on the program. We'd love to have you come back. And
Thank you.
Again, thank you for all that you're doing over there as well. We definitely need to get some foreign policy going, and maybe we will after a new president takes office. I hope so.
Okay, well, I hope so, too. I've been trying to help Senator Kerry.
There you go. Well, General, appreciate you coming on the program.
That was a joke, by the way. So I'm
That's okay.
Remember
we appreciate it.
The Addams Family, Lurch? There you go.
Yeah. There you go.
All right.
We appreciate you coming
care.
on. All right. But
Bye-bye.
This is Jennifer Meadows on 1360 AM with journalist and author Kevin Fobbs. We will be back after this brief message.
It's Thursday night, and you're grabbing drinks with some friends. Started off with a pitcher for the table, which quickly becomes two. There's pool. And there's the photo booth.
All right, everybody squeeze in. Say cheese!
Followed naturally by an order of wings. And another.
Can we get some extra ranch sauce?
Then there's the ceremonial nightcap.
So what are we doing this weekend?
And lastly, it's back to the car, which, if you're buzzed, could be the most expensive night of your life. Getting pulled over for buzz driving could cost you around $10,000 in fines, legal fees, and increased insurance rates. Nothing kills a buzz like getting pulled over for buzz driving, because buzz driving is drunk driving. Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
I started going cold turkey. Well, at least when I'm in the car.
I know I shouldn't do it, but it's so hard to stop. That's why I hide it from myself, so I won't be tempted.
I used to do it all the time. I stopped by locking it in my glove compartment.
My friend used to do it way too much. Now I turn it off when we're in the car.
My solution is simple. I just don't do it.
There are lots of ways to stop yourself and others from texting and driving. How will you stop? Tell us at StopTextStopWrecks.org. Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
'Cause it's a bittersweet symphony.
Here's Graceland with Jennifer Meadows.
Well, this is Graceland on WNJC 1360 AM, part of the Conservative Commandos Radio Network. And I am Jennifer Meadows with Kevin Fobbs, and I believe we are not going to have Charles Albert Johnson on the program with us this evening. He'll be back next week. But Kevin, you know, much has been said about this Trump-Bush feud that has been heating up over comments made around 9/11. It certainly has escalated over the weekend on all the Sunday shows. And I was trying to remember where all this began, Kevin. It was actually back a couple of weeks ago during the second GOP debate. And here's where it all started. It said that the Trump-Bush feud essentially started during the second GOP presidential primary debate when Jeb Bush defended his brother against Trump's criticism about the attacks. He says, and this was Bush talking, he says, "You remember the rubble at the World Trade Center. He sent a clear signal that the United States would be strong and fight Islamic terrorism, and he did keep us safe." And this is what Jeb said about his brother, George W.
Right.
And Trump responded, he says, "You feel safe right now?" He says, "I don't feel so safe." And Bush, a former Florida governor, has since shaped his response to suggest his brother united Americans and kept them safer after the attacks. And I don't think it's so much what happened after the attacks. I think it's more about what happened before the attacks. So, you know, so this is where all this started. And so this was a simple response that happened during the debate, and it's grown into this full-blown thing. And my question to you, Kevin, is it fair to say, like Trump did, that George W. is partly responsible for the 9/11 attacks?
No, I don't. And I'll tell you why. I think that because Trump is nonspecific, and I think anyone can say or use platitudes, and I think that's I read and I saw actually his interview on Fox, and I think platitudes is a disservice, not just to America, but especially to those Americans who lost family members on 9/11, because unless you can actually point to how President Bush was responsible for what happened, or if you have documentation to show how President Bush was responsible for the lead up to 9/11, I think it's dangerous to go into that territory without any specifics. It's irresponsible to me.
Well, and I'm going to disagree with you just slightly here, because the part I have a problem with is because of our immigration policy during that time period. And that's where everybody's kind of taking this. And this started under, I believe it was under Bill Clinton. And then it continued on into the first several months of Bush's presidency. And so in that regard, you know, our immigration policies are responsible for these the attackers, these 19 attackers that were here in the United States. So I would say immigration policies were responsible for what happened. And because Bush was president, that makes him partly responsible. You know, but my question is, why do we continue to let people who hate America into this country? And we've talked about this so many times, Kevin, about our immigration policies, and it makes absolutely no sense. And just like what we were talking about in the first half hour with General Vallely, these Syrian refugees, there is conversation of us taking approximately 200,000 of these Syrians into the United States, and there's absolutely no way to vet these people. So,
I hear what you're saying, Jennifer. But I think the question: 16 of those 19 who took part in 9/11, they were here on visas, student visas, I believe. And so the question then is, do we get rid of student visas? Because I have to question what Trump would have done differently than President Bush, when you have a policy of allowing individuals from other countries to come in on student visas or work visas how would he have changed that? We are not talking about people coming across the border. We're talking about people who had legitimate visas. How he would have stopped that from those individuals, those 16 out of the 19. What would he have done specifically as president? If you can't say that, then I think it still is a disservice. I think that I'm not saying that Trump is a sort of like a candidate who is not legitimate, but on that specific point, I have to wonder. The only thing that he could have done is he's saying that we'll put in tracking devices in those who come in with student visas. That's the only way we're going to find these guys in terms of a change in the policy of immigration or not even immigration, those who come here to study or work. Is that what he's talking about? Specifically, what would he have done differently than President Bush? That's the question that I have about him sort of like going and focusing on that particular point in dealing with the run-up to 9/11.
Well, and I do believe, that we should definitely be scrutinizing these types of visas. And again, you can't make sense. You got to agree with me here. You can't make sense of our immigration policy. It makes no sense. Why have we increased so much Middle Eastern Muslim immigration into the country, and yet European immigration, just talking about, white European we're not allowing those types of people to immigrate into the country, but you're seeing a whole lot of Muslim immigration. And Jeb Bush, talking about this, is funny that, he's kind of taking this stance because he actually agreed that 9/11 happened due to Bush-Clinton immigration policies. And this was an article written by the American Thinker, actually dated today. And it turns out that Jeb Bush agrees. It was about Jeb Bush's book in 2013. It's called Immigration Wars. Reveals that Jeb Bush himself agreed with Trump's argument and admitted that our leaky immigration policy was responsible for the attack, in which he said, indeed, all of the 19 September 11th hijackers were voluntarily imported into the country on visas, like you said there, Kevin, issued to them by the federal government. Almost all of the visas were issued in the predominantly Muslim country of Saudi Arabia. 4 of the September 11th hijackers were Saudis here on visa overstays. And so, so here basically Jeb Bush is contradicting himself, I guess.
Well, I would not actually go so far as to say that there's any consistency in what Jeb Bush says on any given day.
No, neither would I, actually.
Yeah, and I think that to your point about what the focus on, or increased focus on having, like in this case, the topping 280,000 Muslim migrants to the United States, I would be taking a serious look at that. I agree with you. We should be taking a serious look at that, and as we go through this overhaul of the immigration system, because it makes literally no sense at all when we have others who we know to be deemed safe, and not coming from populations which are safe, which are not terrorist laden populations. It just makes common sense. If you have someone coming, or someone's coming in the hundreds of thousands coming into this nation from other areas that we know that they're importing terrorism here or prospective terrorism here, what sense does it make in order to increase those numbers instead of decreasing those numbers and taking even a more serious examination, not when they come here, but where they embark from? I think we should be taking that other step, just like we talked about last year in terms of Ebola. We talked about taking the step of going to the country and making certain that they didn't come into this nation and infect Americans. I think we should be looking at that in dealing with these Muslim countries so that we aren't importing possible terrorist cells from ISIS or ISIL or other Al-Qaeda-like organizations.
Well, and it's common sense, though, isn't it, really, Kevin? I mean, here we are. We've been fighting this war against Islamic extremism for how many years now? And yet we've increased immigration policies, of allowing this, Muslim immigrants into the country by, I can't remember. I remember I talked about this it's been a couple of years ago, actually, and it's increased by 500-fold or something like that. So it really does not make a whole lot of sense. But moving out and away from that for just a minute, talking about tightening up immigration policy, since we're talking about Trump and Bush, you got to think who would be tougher on immigration, fighting terrorism, Bush or Trump? I mean, I think Trump, going away. It's very clear, that he's been very tough in his conversation. This is the kind of person that's a stand up and fight kind of guy. And I think with Jeb Bush, you're going to see more of G.W. Bush policy. It's kind of the establishment way. I don't think we would see a whole lot of change in America under a Jeb Bush presidency, assuming that was ever possible.
I think that last part was probably the most important part. Assuming, because I don't think it's going to happen. But
no, certainly no. He's on the last leg here. So.
But if it were, I agree with you. I believe that Donald Trump has been very, very forceful about what he would do, and he is a person of his word. When he says he's going to do something, he's going to do it. And I believe that in terms of what his word is, in focusing on this issue, because I know that some have said before he got in that we had focused on illegal immigration, but it was only in a small, very tepid way. When he got in the race, actually it made illegal immigration and immigration policies itself front and center for America. And I think actually, if we look at him and Jeb Bush, there really is no comparison. Jeb Bush is an apologist, unfortunately, for him. That is not a winning combination in terms of trying to become president. When you start apologizing for things that are in America and apologizing for those who come across the border illegally. When we have Trump is solid. Trump is determined, and he is focused on protecting America first and dealing with anything else afterwards. And I like that about Trump, and I believe that Americans, if we see it in his poll numbers, like that approach as well.
No, I totally agree. It's just, it's just like what we dealt with when the Carter-Bush years. As we saw Jimmy Carter leaving office, and then as soon as Ronald Reagan came into office, it was just a whole new America. There was a sense of, things were about to change, and they did change. They had changed foreign policy. It changed our economy. And it led to the 80s and 90s where the economy was thriving and our foreign policy was, suddenly our enemies feared us. And I think that's what you want, Kevin. And with that, let's go to break. You're listening to Graceland on Philadelphia's 1360 AM. We will continue this discussion when we come back. Back in a moment.
Hey, we've all had computer problems. The question is, what then? You gonna take that little darling down to one of them big box stores and turn it over to some kid whose voice changed last week? He's got more stainless hardware in his face than a Smith & Wesson pistol? Hell no. That's like taking a lame horse in for a pedicure. Let's be honest. You've shared things with your computer you wouldn't have with your best friend. Now, that's a special bond, and you need someone who understands that relationship, can bring her back good as new. You need Jaffrey Computer. I know that old boy who runs that place, and he's as good as gold and smarter than your 7th grade science teacher. Jaffrey Computers at jaffreycomputer.com. Trust no one else.
Hi, I'm Joe Perry. And Steven Tyler from Aerosmith, here for RAD, recording artists, actors, and athletes against drunk driving. Yeah, we love it when the music does the talking.
And the music stops when someone gets killed.
So never let someone get behind the wheel if they've been drinking. So keep it real. Friends don't let friends drive drunk.
A public service message brought to you by the U.S. Department of Transportation, RAD, the National Association of Broadcasters, and the Ad Council.
You and your family are connected by routine, and you stick to it. But what if a disaster strikes without warning? What if your day's routine is disrupted and you can't reach your family? Have you planned for that? Before a disaster turns your family's world upside down, be ready. Get a kit. Make a plan. Be informed. Learn how at www.ready.gov. Brought to you by the Federal Emergency Management Agency and the Ad Council.
Open book instead, and I still see your reflection inside of my eyes.
Here's Graceland with Jennifer Meadows.
We are listening to Graceland on 1360 AM. I am Jennifer Meadows with co-host and journalist Kevin Fobbs. We've been talking about this feud between Donald Trump and Jeb Bush about 9/11 and what happened during 9/11. Was it, G.W. Bush's policies partly that led into this? And you got to remember, President Bush at that time had only been president for about 9 months. But still, could 9/11 have been prevented if we had seen some change in policy from GW? You got to remember, too, we were warned. We were warned that an attack was impending. So it's not like we weren't warned about 9/11. But I do agree with you, Kevin, what you were saying before the break. It's not totally fair because a lot of what happened, I think, during 9/11 happened under President Clinton's watch and his immigration policies. But since we're talking about this, and we were talking about Muslim countries and immigration skyrocketing, we're watching what's going on in Europe, being completely inundated with Middle Eastern refugees. And my question to you, Kevin, is where do you see this immigration policy taking America if we continue down this road? It's frightening.
We won't have a nation with borders. It's pretty clear. If you, as President Reagan said during the administration, a nation without borders is not a nation. It's that simple. And what we saw happen in Europe, we saw actually happen to some degree in 2014 when we had that flood of kids coming across the border, allegedly kids, and we had some others sneaking across the border as well. Well, that was just a small sample of what will happen because this president has determined that this nation is not just an open border, it's a nation without a border. So we will cease to exist. We will go bankrupt, as more bankrupt than we are right now. We think that we're bankrupt now. We're talking about it on a much mega scale in terms of a nation that's truly bankrupt. No services provided to anyone except illegals, as we see with the liberal left, and especially the socialists are now talking about with, of course, the new socialists, i.e. Hillary, and the old socialists, really old socialists in terms of Sanders. So my point, I guess, is that this nation will be destroyed from without and from within. That is the future without tight immigration, without a tight control, and without a wall. I have to agree with Trump. We got to put a wall up. I'm sorry. If we have to put it up and electrify it, whatever we need, whatever we have to do, we have to protect America. It really is that simple.
Well, and what happened to being able to protect and provide for our citizens first? What happened to that whole concept? Instead, we're seeing a backwards situation where, we're actually tending to illegal immigrants and their needs. We're seeing all these folks sitting out here on welfare and getting health care and all kinds of things. And then, Americans are going without. They're taking Americans' jobs. We've seen plenty over this past year of employers that actually are giving bonuses for hiring illegals over American citizens. So I agree with you. We're looking at, if we continue down this road, this path, where we no longer have this southern border. And at this point, Kevin, we don't. A complete breakdown of our system and our society. And you're starting to see that. It's happening now, actually.
Well, if you live especially in the urban areas around the country, especially I'm talking about Chicago in particular, if you look at Chicago, where you had hospitals closed down and schools actually being inundated by illegal aliens. And so the money that would typically go for education in Chicago or education in Illinois or hospital and healthcare in Illinois, that money has been siphoned off in the tens of millions for illegal aliens. And what it really does is not only bankrupts the system, because they, of course, go hat in hand to the federal government and say, you got to give us more money. So you have a bankrupt city and a bankrupt state. And now we will end up with a more bankrupt nation. That is the fate of America.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I mean, we cannot continue to sustain the path that we are on. And, certainly government knows this. And, we're looking at what's happening in Europe, in France. It's crazy. You look at what's going on in Germany. And isn't it interesting, Kevin, that we're not seeing the media outlets picking up about how the people of so many of these nations are beginning to rise up and protest against their own government over what's happening with immigration.
We aren't going to. And I find it even when it first started happening, of course, they started covering, as the general said, those individuals, urging, they really were urgent about it. And we saw all that. But now, of course, you got to pay the bill. And the bill actually will be paid by those residents of those countries, those citizens, and more importantly, they have to provide services. And these services still come out of somebody's pocket. And also, I've seen in various cases where you have these individuals coming from Syria, and I have to believe that they actually are ISIS related because they're talking about Sharia law. I mean, we know that they've done that already, asked for it in Germany, asked for it in France, but now we're seeing an escalation of that in France and in Germany and in other countries as well, Western countries where these immigrants have decided to come in the hundreds of thousands. So it really, not even a spot anywhere in terms of news coverage. So I see this as to be actually, you will see Europe implode from within because of this crisis, and it really is a crisis. And I see that America, if this president, as the general says, allows 200,000 Syrian refugees, quote, to come here, this country will be in revolution mode.
No, I agree with you, and it's something that we've talked about on this program before. Talking about Muslim immigration, there are seed communities all over the country right now that are allowing this type of immigration, legal immigration of countries all over the Middle East that are bringing in thousands into small communities all over the United States. And, you're not hearing a whole lot about it except for in the conservative media outlets.
Right.
And, it's changing whole communities. And I think it's something that needs to continue to be talked about. And I really believe until we see a change in Washington, D.C., we're going to continue to see this, Kevin. And it's sad because, we're overlooking Americans and our citizens, our veterans, Christians, and continuing to cater to illegal immigrants and even legal immigrants in this case.
Well, I think what we have to do, too, Jennifer, is that if you live anywhere in any small town, large town, suburb, or whatever in this nation, you see this happening, you have to contact conservative social media or regular media, conservative media, and let them know what's happening in your town, because it is happening all over this nation. And until people see that, they think that they're alone. Most people who live in these towns where we see this happening, they feel that they're alone and isolated. But the reality is, their isolation can be actually, if you look at it from Washington State to South Carolina, from where you are in your state, Jennifer, to where I am in Ohio and so on, it's happening. We have to let our conservative media not only know about it, but we ourselves, as we're doing right now, talk about it and demand that, especially Carson and Trump and some of the others, talk about specifically what they will do and how they will halt this and how they will prevent this from occurring here in America.
Yes, I completely agree with you, Kevin, and it's something we're going to continue talking about, I'm sure, through. So I'm glad, at least this little feud between Jeb Bush and Donald Trump is at least getting people talking about immigration policy. Right. Why are we allowing so many Islamic countries, so much Muslim immigration into the United States? It doesn't make sense, Kevin. It just doesn't make sense. No. These are the people that are not assimilating in Europe. Why would we bring them into the country unless we were trying to create a problem for ourselves? It doesn't make any sense.
And you know what? I ask like Rubio, who's actually expanding the resettlement of Muslim immigrants. We have to look at those policies that are either being supported by these candidates or are being offered up, as in Rubio's case, by these candidates, and let Americans, conservatives especially, understand they can't represent us, because this is just one example of a foothold that these terrorists and those who are leaning toward terrorism will utilize by utilizing a policy that's being advocated by a presidential candidate. We can't allow that to happen. We have to stop that.
No, and so, I mean, I think this little feud, like I said a minute ago, has served a good purpose. And so at least we need to continue talking about and scrutinizing our immigration policies. And with that, Kevin, we are just about out of time. Always appreciate you tuning in to the program. So, Kevin, please tell people where they can follow you and also your writing as well.
Okay, you can follow me at American Christian Civil Rights Movement.com. That's the website. You can also follow me on Twitter, and you can follow me at communitiesdigitalnews.com.
And you can find me out on Twitter. That's JM Graceland, and also on the website that's JenniferMeadowsGraceland.com. And thanks again for listening, Philadelphia. Take care. God bless. And until next week, good night, folks.
The leader in talk radio on the internet, right here on K98Talk.com.
When our water heater broke down last month, it was a nightmare. It took 5 hours for the plumber to show up, and he charged us a couple of $100 just to come out. And then it cost another $1,800 to put in the new water heater. By the time it was all said and done, I felt like I'd been taken. But what else could I do?
The smartest thing you can do is get a home warranty from American Residential Warranty. Their home warranties pay to repair or replace all your major appliances when they break, and they will break, and at the worst possible time. Call American Residential Warranty right now for free information on home warranties starting at just pennies a day. Don't wait for your refrigerator to stop running or your ceiling fans to stop turning. Call American Residential Warranty right now. Ask how you can save up to 50% on washer and dryer coverage. Just call 1-800-513-6154. That's 1-800-513-6154. Again, 1-800-513-6154. Call now.
This is Slickery Trigger for Rebel Road Tactical. With proper care and feeding, your pistol will be ready when you need it. There to save your life. Shouldn't your gear be that good? Whether you need a holster for comfortable everyday carry or a tough-as-nails holster for your next training course, Rebel Road Tactical has what you need. Check us out on the web at rebelroadtactical.com.
Tired of paying outrageous prices for Viagra? Well, we have great news for you. Now you can finally get Viagra at huge discounts. Healthy Man allows you to save up to $500 on Viagra. Why pay U.S. pharmacy prices of $15 per pill or more when you can get Viagra for less than $3 a pill? Call today and get 40 Viagra pills for only $99. This can cost as much as $600 at your local pharmacy. You can't afford not to call us. If you want Viagra at the lowest prices, never pay $15 $3 a pill pharmacy prices again. Get Viagra for less than $3 a pill. Call 1-800-516-7602 today and save up to $500 and get 40 pills for just $99. Healthy Man is fast, easy, and affordable. Operators are waiting at 1-800-516-7602 to take your call right now. Call 1-800-516-7602. That's 1-800-516-7602. Again, 1-800-516-7602.